I mean, this story is so unbelievably frustrating. Why are the human rights of someone who has committed such awful crimes to the point where they are responsible, it is estimated, for 90% of the heroin on our streets at one point? That's what a prolific gangster that they were. I mean, there is nuance. There are surely examples where you look at the crimes and you say, well, actually, OK, perhaps the crime isn't bad enough that would warrant someone being kicked out, and they do deserve to see their family. But this is surely a glaring example of the crime not matching the verdict from the immigration court.
Oh, I would actually agree with that as a barrister myself and someone who's been involved in immigration, that when one looks at the round of what is meant by the European Courts of Human Rights, Article 8, which is the right to family life, it is a very strong principle that first and foremost, a state is entitled to control somebody who has come to this country as an alien, that's the phraseology that's used, a legal migrant or someone who's had a visa that's acceptable, and they can lose their right to residence in their territory. And the ECHR does not guarantee the rights of the individual to come in here. So the question that the court is asked then, under Article 8, is whether that person has these circumstances for family life. And that means he's got ties to the community, they look at the wife, and they look at the children. But the question that I find really strange about it, Cristo, is it says very clearly the seriousness of the offence and the public interest are factors of considerable importance. So for me, how is it the immigration court has come to a conclusion that somebody who controlled 90, did you say 80 or 90%?
90%.
90% of the heroin trade in the United Kingdom is not a serious offence? And how is it not in the public interest for someone who's controlled that, and who no doubt still has links or knows people or how to deal with it, should not be expelled in the public interest? Those are the two factors I think everybody would find confusing. I certainly do. I cannot understand it myself. And I think that the Home Office should consider this. But what it will do, Cristo, very strangely enough, is give more and more fire to those people like myself who for many years have argued that the ECHR is no longer compatible with the UK's common law and common sense when it deals with criminals such as this.
And that was going to be my next question, actually, was, so there isn't a blanket ruling that whatever the crime, if you've a family life here in the UK, there isn't a blanket rule to say whatever the crime may be, if you've enough of an argument of a family life here in the UK, you get to stay. The severity, the level of the crime and the presumably number of victims, or the severity and the impact on the victims, that is something that is supposed to be taken into account in the decision.
Oh, absolutely, and you're quite right on that. But I think it was Dominic Raab who said or claimed that there is a rising tide of people claiming the right to family life under Article 8 of the ECHR. And as a consequence of that, they're actually being allowed to stay. And that is because over time, what gave countries the opportunity to remove these people, as I said, the seriousness and whether in the public interest, has been watered down by the ECHR's cases across Europe in their own, and then as we are signatories of those, we have to import it into our own common law. And so they're watered down. So where most right-minded people would say 90% of the heroin trade is a serious offence, it's dangerous to the country, because we've got case law across Europe through the ECHR, then that means that we can water it down. And it gives a great opportunity for anybody making a claim for family life to say, look at the danger it does to my children. I'll be separated from them. They'll never be able to come to see me. Most people would say, I'm sorry, but if you are a foreign citizen who commits crime here and you have children here, then that is one of the consequences of you doing such a serious crime. You have not only damaged yourself, but you're damaging the children, and they will have the opportunity either to leave to go with you, or you suffer the consequences of leaving the country and having to try and balance it out in a different way. It's not our problem.
What are the practicalities then of what people are suggesting of leaving the ECHR. Is reform better for the ECHR, or is leaving it better?
Okay, reform is a very interesting element. It's been considered by the Conservative Party for many years. That's why you have this big argument that goes on between them. And I've had conversations with some of the Labour Party members who are in the kind of policy unit and also dealing with immigration, who are thinking maybe we could also reform it through House of Lords decisions or through decisions in the House of Commons. The problem with it is you can't reform it whilst it's part of our common law, and whilst you allow every case law to actually enter into our common law, because then it comes up through our judicial system, it's dealt with by the immigration courts, and indeed further up the chain if we go to the appeals courts. So you can't just reform it, unfortunately, very easily. The only way is an in or out option, a bit like Brexit in many ways, is you make that decision that we leave the ECHR, and then that's not the final cue. Just because we leave, people think, that's the golden nugget that we have. It's not. You will then have to use parliamentary legislation to revoke the clauses and the phraseology that's been embedded in our common law. So it's a two-stage process. Dominic Raab understood that. I think also Suella Braverman understood that, but there is no way that anyone in the Labour Party is going to do that. So whilst that's in place, these cases, I'm afraid, just as like we had last week, where we had the Albanian who was able to leave the country and come back 4 times, having been convicted and expelled, these will continue. And it makes a mockery of our judicial system. It makes a mockery of our returns policy.
But then my big fear, I just keep thinking about COVID and how much we were frustrated and how much it seemed an infringement on our right to day-to-day life that the government at the time was asking us to show a vaccine passport, was asking us to sit, feet away from each other in a bench, arresting people because they were having a cup of coffee and it was too far from their home. Do you know what I mean? Now, stuff that we look back on now, which was crazy. And would we end up in a situation where we would regret leaving the ECHR if governments ever got those sorts of ideas again?
I don't think so, because if you remember very clearly, I was one of those like yourself, incredibly frustrated, annoyed by the things that we now know to be not necessarily true.
I wasn't enough. I regret that I wasn't. Well, I've always said this, but I regret I wasn't annoyed enough by it at the time. And now I look back on it as so silly. But at the time, I drank the Kool-Aid a little bit as well, I have to be honest, and I really regret that.
I agree. I was kind of halfway house, but I did lose friends about that particular process because of the way it's done. But the point about it is we were still in the ECHR. There were no challenges. There was nothing that protected us from the ECHR at the time. If we really wanted to go down a way that gave us much more freedoms and the ability to challenge government, then it's not Europe that we need to look to. It's actually the way that the United States have their own effectively Bill of Rights, which people can say the right to bear arms, the right to liberty and freedom. They have much stronger principles in their constitution that has to be implemented in their common law. And although our system is very difficult, we don't have that constitutional opportunity because we're basically common law. I do believe that, again, looking back at Dominic Raab, and he was criticised for many things, but his plan, along with David Davis, of a Bill of Rights...
You love Dominic Raab today, don't you?
No. It's not necessarily I love Dominic Raab. It's just that on this particular issue of the ECHR and the Bill of Rights, he's the only politician in the Conservative Party that's pushed this with any forthrightness over the past a decade or so, along with David Davis. They were the two principal people behind it. There are others who've got behind it in the Conservative Party, Priti Patel, for example. But at the end of the day, that principle of a Bill of Rights is the closest that we'd get to the United States.
So then how would we... If we did that, right, and so I think where we're getting to, and we've got this with a few of the people messaging as well, that we would then need perhaps some sort of written constitution or some sort of written, as you say, Bill of Rights. But again, then, looking at our elected politicians at the moment, looking at our elected politicians in the last 30 years, let's say, who would we trust to write that Bill of Rights? How would we even come up with that Bill of Rights? I wouldn't trust Keir Starmer to to write a cheque, and he loves writing those for the people that he likes. So who would you trust to write that?
Well, I think we'd have to have a constitutional assembly of right-minded thinking to do that. But at the end of the day, who wrote the ECHR? Who wrote the ability to have the laws of the European community injected into the UK? It wasn't our parliamentarians who did that. The ECHR was drafted by sets of lawyers who were created by political parties and reviewed by them and governments across Europe at the time. So the Bill of Rights is a similar process, but just related just to the United Kingdom. But I would like to have the idea of a constitutional review undertaken by those who are both in politics, in law, in constitutional understanding about this, to come together to get those principles. And of course, in my view, we could look across to the United States and take one or two issues from elsewhere. But we do have that issue that it has to be created first and then embedded in the UK. And the only way our laws would work is if it flowed through our common law system. But that way, it would not be interfered by other countries, such as the ECHR. That's the problem. We have a system of common law in the UK, matched by Ireland, but nowhere else in Europe. And so that's the way it flows into our system, whereas its Bill of Rights would be our system, created by us, and I admit, has those problems that you've raised, Cristo, about which politicians to trust. But let's take it out of their hands and let the political parties put maybe one or two members in a constitutional review.
All right. I'm going to put you forward to be in there as well. And you can go in with Dominic Raab, all right? The two of you can, he can take the other space.
I'm not sure he's going to thank me, Cristo, for it, but to be honest, I won't be on his Christmas card list.
Well, you should be after today. You definitely should be.